Hey there, friends. My name is Jim, and with all the insanity going on right now, from a Supreme Court justice chosen for being a woman who can't define woman, to, a man in a dress arguing with another man in a dress about whether or not involving women's sports in their public fetish is appropriate or not, it's important to step back and remember that none of this is organic. This is not the way that a normal society progresses, given we become more accepting over time, which in and of itself is an unfounded assumption. But this is the way a society progresses when incentivized to do so by both media moguls and rootless transnational elites changing the rules about how you can invest your money. If you're not sure what I mean about that last part, you are in for a video. Meet Larry Fink, the architect of the automized AI Sodom and Gomorrah we are heading for. It's time to talk about him. So before we get started, I want to remind you guys that you are how I get these stories out there, so if you think this is a good video, please feel free to highlight the URL, send it to a friend, mother, sister, brother, whoever, and if you think what I do is actually valuable, feel free to check me out on Patreon, Locals, or my website at jimmyjams.xyz. Now let's get into it. So, who is Larry Fink? Well, according to Wikipedia, quote, Lawrence Douglas Fink is an American billionaire businessman. He is the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, an American multinational investment management corporation. BlackRock is the largest money management firm in the world with more than $10 trillion in assets under management, giving the firm enormous power over the global financial system. And underneath they list his net worth at around $1.1 billion, which is impressive, although that would actually skew him as being less powerful than he really is. In reality, he controls a total of around $12 trillion through his investment firms, and throughout the last couple of decades, he has been a busy boy indeed. Have you ever wondered why Go Woke Get Broke schemes started? Why seemingly companies have been introducing toxic cultures, destroying their products and productivity, their brand name, and everything you used to love about them? It doesn't really make sense as a move to target leftists because you're cutting off half the consumers in your marketplace, and you'd be correct in concluding that it doesn't make sense until you meet Larry Fink. Now, Larry's been working diligently over the last 20 years and has created the largest hedge fund in existence, a hedge fund named BlackRock. Our story starts back in 2007 and 2008 during the housing bubble crash. Now, if you don't remember or are too young, the Federal Reserve is freaking out, not really knowing how to handle the situation they brought upon themselves, and it's starting to look more and more like the system will actually collapse this time, and they just simply don't have the tools to deal with it. Then walks in Larry Fink. Larry here, always the philanthropist, offered to help. He was running a $7 trillion hedge fund at the time and helped the government create something called maiden lane transactions. And with this vehicle, they restructured all of the defunct Wall Street giants' assets to be placed and managed by the Fed in an official sense. However, in reality, it was Larry who decided what happened with all that money. Fast forward to the 2020 market crash. Economists blame it on COVID, but a ton of it has to do with the consequences of them continually kicking the can down the road. The Fed is panicking again because the corporate bond market was ready to collapse as investors no longer wanted the zombie corporations dead anymore. If this market went down, corporations wouldn't really be able to fund themselves except for issuing more stock, which would devaluate further equities and create something of a death spiral. But who walks in the door to be the savior yet again? Why, none other but Larry Fink, of course. The Fed basically told Larry to buy worthless bonds, and they in turn would actively buy his ETF to subsidize his company, basically trading some of our cash for some of your cash. However, this in turn meant that BlackRock is basically having freshly minted US dollars buy their ETF, before the inflation from printing those new dollars affects the value for everybody else. And if you're one to complain about socializing the losses and privatizing the gains, this is a perfect example of that. At this point, BlackRock is now effectively an essential part of the US financial system, to the point that Bloomberg called them the fourth branch of government. Here's a bit of that article by Annie Massa and Caleb Melby. Here we go. In Fink we trust. BlackRock is now, quote, fourth branch of government. When the Fed looked for bond buying help in a crisis, it turned to the giant money manager. And this just goes to show how our corporate financial system is completely intertwined with the government, and people like it. People think it's a good thing. When the Federal Reserve needed Wall Street's help with its pandemic rescue mission, it went straight to Larry Fink. The BlackRock Inc. co-founder, chairman, and chief executive officer has become one of the industry's most important government whisperers. I love government whisperers, don't you? People who whispering into our representatives. In contrast to other influential financiers who have built on ties to President Trump, Fink possesses a power that's more technocratic, just what we need. BlackRock, the world's largest money manager, can do the things government needs right now. The company's new assignment is a much bigger version of the one it took after the 2008 financial crisis, when the Federal Reserve enlisted it to dispose of toxic mortgage securities from Bear Stearns & Co. and AIG. This time, it'll help the Fed prop up the entire corporate bond market by purchasing, on the central bank's behalf, what could become a $750 billion portfolio of debt. One part of the Fed's plan is to buy bond exchange-traded funds. BlackRock itself runs ETFs under the iShares brand and could end up buying funds it manages. There are rules in place to avoid conflicts of interests. For example, it won't charge Fed management fees on ETF shares. BlackRock is acting as a fiduciary to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, says a spokesman for the company. As such, BlackRock will execute this mandate at the sole discretion of the bank and in accordance with their detailed investment guidelines. Still, the arrangement is bringing new attention to the company's scale and ubiquity. It's impossible to think of BlackRock without thinking of them as a fourth branch of government, says William Bird Thistle, a professor at the Chicago Kent College of Law who studies the fund industry. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, yeah, Jim, we know our corporate financial system is totally corrupt, but what does that have to do with wokeness? Well, you see, Larry Fink recently has become an obsessive pioneer in the field of what is called ESG investing. ESG investing stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance Investing. In short, Larry Fink's investment philosophy is to reward companies that follow certain rules with investment dollars. These are the rules you hear articles praising in leftist news, such as CEOs not taking a salary or the board of directors being majority-minority. In California recently, a new law was passed imposing that in every company's C-suite, which is like the CEOs, CSOs, CFOs, all the high-up, highly paid professional bosses, must have members from a so-called underrepresented communities, which is just code for being not a straight white male. From there, he throws his combined $12 trillion to the companies with the highest ESG score, which in turn is just a proxy party loyalty score, showing which company follows the orders from these rootless transnational elites the best. And now I'm sure you're thinking, well, that's a perverse incentive, but companies can just find investors elsewhere, right? And that's where you'd be wrong. Throughout all of this corporate government collusion, Fink has been masterfully effective at having his financial risk management service called Aladdin become the standard throughout every major investment institution and fund. This service rates investments based on their risk, and yep, you guessed it, ESG scores are baked into the cake. Even if the service wasn't as massively integrated as it is, these companies take their cues from the same people and are all basing their investment through ESG scores regardless. So, you see, this is what's going on. This is why Aunt Jemima suddenly decided it was racist after 100 years at the same time the Land O'Lakes and the Washington Redskins did. Every single company has to increase their wokeness to get investment dollars, otherwise their ESG score will be too low to receive investment from anybody but Tony the loan shark up the street. Due to our dependency on the Federal Reserve and the incompetence of people in charge, our culture has been sold to the highest bidder, to be experimented on and adjusted with as they see fit. I want you to think of all the times in history where a few evil men at the top ended up with the death of millions below them, and multiply it by all the dystopian science fiction you've ever seen. That should bring you to a rough idea approximating just about where we are. Peace.